Okay, it's a new year, a new series, and the most unoriginal idea I could come up with is to tell you about the games that have hit the table in the last month. But if you think of this as an even briefer set of reviews than you're used to, you might even come away with some helpful inspiration regarding your next purchase. Anyways, we're embracing the alphabet today and going from A to Z instead of any other established sorting method. So join me please on this journal of my gaming experiences in the month of January. Android Netrunner, one of the greatest achievements in dueling card games due to its asymmetry and tight gameplay. You'll be playing as either the runner trying to hack the corporation servers with a paltry amount of actions and resources at your disposal, or trying to stall or fry the runner's brain as the corporation before you're able to win the game. This is about as revered of a card game as you'll find outside Magic the Gathering. Most if not all of my plays now get done on Jinteki, the browser version of the game that is as win gets. And of course I never miss an opportunity to give a shout out to Null Signal Games, the continuing committee doing a splendid job of keeping the game alive and producing new unofficial content in the process. Brass Birmingham has been the number one game on BGG for the best part of the last year, and for good reason. This route building game where the cards in your hand dictate what you can build and where on the titular city and its surrounding area shaped board. And although it's a market based game, really it's about building things and then making sure those things get used. And that ties into the good reason I mentioned before. Not many games refine that sense of needing to do things at the right time and in the right place as well as this. And as a cherry on top, people can drink your milkshake, aka use your resources, and you kind of both win at the same time. Weird, but oh so delicious. This is one of those few board games worthy of a tournament setting. Not quite my number one, mind you. Castles of Mad King Ludwig was a Christmas gift and one that had been on the shortlist for quite a while. And although it fell short of my admittedly very high expectations, it's still a fine tile placement game. Each turn you'll be paying for a tile representing a room or garden space and placing it in your growing castle, with all sorts of adjacency based points up for grabs, and a room specific special ability when you block off all the exits, so it's fairly vanilla in that sense. However, the master builder for the turn is the one that A dictates what tile costs what within the available open market spaces, and B receives the dough from the other players when they take a tile. So that's a neat opposing dynamic and decision space you get to chew on. Still a very nice game that will probably stay in the collection for a while yet. Everyone needs a few filler games available to turn to, and Cat Lady and its 3x3 grid of cards you can open draft each turn with is a lovely little yarn. Oh dear. So from the grid you'll pick a column or row of 3 cards, which will lock that column or row for the next player when they choose, and said cards will either be cats that you'll need to feed to gain points, the food to, feed them with, toys or costumes for set collection, points gathering purposes, and a couple of other card types that round out the game. I really enjoy the fact that you can kind of just lean back into this playing, yet there isn't an insignificant amount of strategy on offer, as you can't hoard too many cats because unfed cats will ultimately scratch the shiznit out of your points all. What a pleasant game though. Conspiracy Abyss Universe is more or less the small box version of Abyss, a game I've had a flip-floppy relationship with over the years. Conspiracy does strip away and deviate slightly from its sibling, but set collection, this time with some pattern building, is still the core of the game. On your turn you'll either pick 1, 2 or 3 cards from the top of the communal deck, with an understanding you'll only be keeping 1 to place in your triangular tableau, and the remainder will then be left in the marketplace, stacked in their respective colours. Which is relevant because instead on your turn you could choose to take all of the cards of a particular colour from said marketplace. The rest is typical point Saladin score for your highest value lord, sets of adjacent cards, etc, etc. Another enjoyable filler game then? Yes please and thank you. Etherfield has only seen the table in its introductory tutorial form. Awakened Realms do a solid job of slowly introducing the mechanics of these card-based exploration and storytelling games, even though contrarily the rulebook is a bit all over the place, but so far so very intrigued. I'm prioritising another of their games at the moment, what we'll talk about later, but I'm already digging the theming of who the Huckleberry am I and what happened to my memory, and its creepy ethereal aesthetic. Mechanically, this uses deck building hand management to dictate your available actions, and outside of that I can't add much more to my initial thoughts. There seems to be a lot of love and hate for this game out there, so I look forward to seeing where this ends up for me. Expeditions may well be set in the Scythe universe, but the only things it really shares with it is its setting and the fact that the endgame is triggered by achieving X number of global objectives. Other than that, it's a very slick deck building and grid movement game where you and a modular board get familiar with the available tiles, his interactions and encounters. There's a splash of worker placement in there, as well as the cards you play can be bolstered by having the right meeples to go with them. You've also got 2 tracks that denote your strength and willpower or some such, although they may well have been called Fist and Brain, I do not remember. There's quests, there are binary encounters, and a lot of little things that make up a game that gets a firm, if unspectacular, nod of approval. Fields of Arle is my latest Oooh game. I like to only drip feed myself Mr. Rosenberg. Hello? Because, well, I don't revere Agricola Caverna as much as others. Respect is more the word, and there's only so much agriculture I can have in my collection. Fields of Arle though is exceptional. I bought this to play solo and it's capped at 2 in the base box, and I certainly wasn't disappointed. Providing that sandbox worker placement nature and fixed game timer provides for such an enjoyable puzzle-like experience of min-maxing. And if you're prepared to go with the flow, it encourages you to try different paths each time it hits the table. It's a familiar theme, of course, tending to your land, caring for animals and watching them make babies, but I can live with that, because this is tight and awesome all in one. Horrified saw its first playthrough in a while. I love this game's throwback mechanics, basic movement and pick up and deliver that would not be out of place in many games from 30 years ago. But it's a game that is completely and utterly transformed by the variations on a theme that you'll find in the universal monsters that you're pitted up against. In a standard game you'll pick 2 of the 6 available, although Thranky comes with his bride, so there's some hacks right there, and then you'll do your best to stay out of their way, save damsels and dumbasses in distress, and otherwise collect all the things you need to take down each foe. Part of me can't figure out why I enjoy this game so much, and then I remember family weight doesn't need to reinvent the wheel, it just needs to be fun. Legacy of You found itself in a perilous position in my consumer mindset. I generally enjoy Garfield games, yet I don't have the patience and or time for campaign legacy games. Maybe then it was the one player only element that tipped the scales towards what the hell, let's give it a try. And yes, I am very much glad that I did so. It employs familiar worker placement tropes where the more workers you have, the more you can stay ahead of the curve, in terms of this being a race to build a canal before you get flooded out or barbarians have their way with your collection of rare meeples. The legacy elements are nice and light, as they all just modify the decks of cards you'll use throughout. Setup and teardown is not much of a problem, and this may well be the first legacy game I ever complete. Nice! Monumental is actually the closest thing to Cat Lady of the games we'll talk about today, which is somewhat preposterous. Again, we're staring at a 3x3 grid of cards, this time without cats and spray cans. Still, you are picking cards this time from your own personal marketplace, but also taking your pick of a row and a column of cards. This dictates then what actions you can take, and the rest is almost like expeditions, which we've already talked about. I can see a 6 Degrees of Kevin board game segment in our future. But here it's hexes and grid movement, bullying neutral enemies, but also trudging across your opponent's domain and making their lives difficult too. I've liked my plays of this so far, and I'm curious to see how often it gets to the table moving forward. Role Player doesn't see much table time now because mostly I play it on the app. Still, I'm not sure a board game themed around character creation in a role-playing game will ever get old for me. Dice placement and manipulation are the name of the game as you try and total up 3 dice in each of your characteristic rows to a specified amount. You also draft cards that help you gain further abilities and means to score points. You've then got further objectives with whatever profession and trait you draw at the outset of the game, meaning your job is to tie these sometimes competing requirements together and weave your way to a high score. Love this game. Siege of Valeria is another solo only game, one which I can't really make my mind up on. It's fundamentally tower defense with just cards and some dice rolling and hand management. At the start of every turn you have a majestic horde of ne'er-do-wells descending upon your home base, and you'll use the dice you've rolled to overcome these, with each enemy card needing a specific target number in one of the 2 dice colours you have access to wreck their face. Then it's mapping out the way to do this slaying most optimally. Defeated foes go to your hand and give you one-time abilities to then bolster your efforts further. But beware, siege engines are slowly approaching from the back lines. Take enough of those out before you get overwhelmed and it's job done. Now I do know I like it, but there's also very little to sing from the rooftops about here. But there are only so many solo games out there, and who needs to hear me singing? Right, I know Tainted Gloom isn't a new game, but it's one I've thought about longingly since its release, and so far it's been a blast. This exploration storytelling game set in a pseudo-Arthurian setting is backed up by some very nice deck building and encounter mechanics, where you must align the symbols on your cards to whatever the encounter, whether it's combat or diplomacy, dictates. Its campaign has an overarching story, and the fog of war, or just plain darkness, is kept at bay through these humanoid idols that you periodically need to stoke to light your path. Each scenario will see you traversing the larger landscape, and although sometimes your battle for basic resources can eke the fun out of the game, it otherwise does so much to bring a rich and rewarding gameplay experience to the table that mean any minor drawbacks feel trivial. The Big Book of Madness is a game that I hadn't played in so long I needed to find out if it still had a place in my collection. And whilst the answer to that question was ultimately no, it wasn't necessarily because I think it's a bad game, just not a game for my current needs. Primarily its focus is resource management using deck building and action selection, whereby you need the right types of resources to fulfill your part and take actions in overcoming a growing number of encounters each turn until you come up against the final boss at the end. I suppose the problem is you're not really building to anything, as the boss is just a rinse and repeat of everything that's come before, and so this feels more like a game of mitigation than enjoyable forward progress, and I can get that better elsewhere. Tetum, is that what we're calling it? Is a wonderful midday heavyweight Euro that has a lot of things going for it. The It Will Probably Never Get Boring action selection mechanic, where you select a dice, obtain that number of that type of resource, but then receive an inverse amount of power to spend on the associated action that the dice was selected from, is here front and centre. The scene then for this mechanical platform will see you moving 2 different types of workers around the map, building houses and castle segments to plant your figurative flag, fulfilling contracts, filling your player board that feeds your geographical expansion, and so on and so forth. There's interconnectivity everywhere in Tetum, and whilst there's nothing groundbreaking here, there's definitely a gold seal of approval from me. Turing Machine is a straightforward logical deduction game, where you ask a thematic proto-computer a number of questions of it during each round in order to decipher the only remaining possible 3-digit solution. The means to do this is pretty cool. You make an initial guess, take the appropriate cards and line them up on top of the verifier card, and the holes punched in your guess cards will reveal whether any of the global criterion have been met for your guess. You keep notes of the answers and get closer to the final solution as you do, and then hope your questions get you there quicker than everyone else, or if playing co-op, by a set number of rounds. You see, board games don't have to be all strategy all the time. If you like deduction, then this is as neat and accessible as it gets. Vengeance Roll and Fight is another game that saw play this month and was fighting to stay in the collection. The couple of times I played it previously just didn't touch me where I thought it would. Chucking dice and marking off foes with a dry erase marker in some kind of cathartic festival of abandon was not quite what I thought it would feel like. The base version of the game sees you all fighting over one pool of dice, and that gives it its real-time nature. You're rolling 4 dice at a time and then re-rolling them until you get a combination you can use to move, thwack, shoot or use special abilities in the coming phase, which I'm afraid feels like a bit of a mess. This time though, I A, tried to play solo, and B, didn't time myself like the rules suggested, but it still didn't do enough for me strategically. It's a pretty game, but it feels a bit empty despite itself. Vindication on the other hand does not feel empty in the least, and it's quite refreshing in that it's not really like much else that I can think of. As you find yourselves washed ashore on the edge of a modular hexagonal board, you'll find there's a lot that's about to go down. Around said board is 6 zones, 3 of those require basic resources to obtain cards from, and the remainder require more effort to obtain, with commensurate rewards. Each location you visit will give you said resources, or enable specific interactions, with the idea being that your growing tableau of cards will increase your available options. Whether that be slaying monsters or treasure hunting, there's plenty of ways to approach a game of Vindication, which is why I already know I'm going to keep coming back to it. And finally, War of the Ring, the card game, is something I'd been desperate to try solo since I heard about the Against the Shadow expansion. Now I've still never played Big Daddy War of the Ring, and I most probably never will, so why not try a card game distillation of it? The problem, I realise all too late, is there are already 2 great Lord of the Rings card games in my collection, the trading card game and the living card game, and this does very little better than either of them. In fact, it reminds me of the TCG more, and it doesn't in any way, shape or form replace it. Anyways, here you are fighting with the opposition each round, represented by either the 3 peoples or the shadow, and you're doing so matching symbols on the cards you play to represent your attack or defense totals. The winner at each location then takes that card to their victory pile, and so on and so forth until a winner is declared. Now I am obviously oversimplifying hugely here, and there is a place for this game I'm sure, just not most likely in my collection. And that was a lot longer than I thought it would be. Obviously the more I repeat play games I've already talked about in this format, the more abridged and more personal and journal-like these segments will become. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this trip down short-term memory lane. Alas, I've been the voice of Benji, and this video has ended.